Hey, so welcome to the first ever Harland D Podcast. I'm Harland D White, your host today. This podcast is going to be all around personal finance, and the goal is to normalize personal finance and make it an everyday conversation for everyone. Today, I have a very special guest with us, and his name is David, a good friend of mine. We've known each other for many, many years, and he himself is also on a debt-free journey, or he might have, I'll let him get into where he's at on that progression. But the reason why I thought it was good to bring him on as the first guest, not only to help ease myself into this whole podcasting thing, but it's also because he's seen the whole progression from when I was in debt, got out of debt, got back into debt, and now on another journey to get out of debt. So he's pretty much seen it all. So hopefully we can kind of dive into his backstory, kind of how we met, kind of how we started talking through the whole personal finance many years ago. And then we can kind of, talk about where we're at today. So David, welcome to the podcast. I think we already even had a conversation earlier this morning. David's also a good friend of mine, like I just said. So we had an accountability group that we've been having like every Saturday for how many years now?
A long time, very long time.
Long time. So that was at 6:30 this morning. So he's been gracious enough to give me some more of his time to do this podcast. So David, if you could start off with a brief introduction, and we can kind of get this started.
Thank you very much, Harland. It's a pleasure to be your first guest on this podcast. Like Harland said, my name is David Nwosu. Obviously, Nwosu is not an American name. I grew up in Nigeria and moved to the United States, I think it was in 1999. So I've been here for over 20 years. Grew up in Nigeria, spent probably half of my life in Nigeria and the other half over here. And I have, like Harland mentioned, had my ups and downs as well with debt. I'm a married father with 3 kids, professional, CPA, CIA, an accountant from U of I. That's kind of my background in a nutshell.
Okay, cool. So when did we meet? What year did you start at the job that we met at?
So I think I started at Navistar in 2010.
Okay,
Right?
so it was 2010. So we've known each other, I guess, over 11 years now.
Right.
Yeah. And so I think at Navistar we worked. It was a big company, but we worked within the same group. And so I think just eventually through conversations, we ended up talking. They had a lot of employee resource groups at that company. So I know we were actively involved in the Black Employee Resource Group. We got into Toastmasters, all kinds of things. But I know very early on, I don't know if it was the first year, but maybe that second year, somehow we started talking about Dave Ramsey and getting out of debt. I know myself personally, I'd already been listening to Dave Ramsey. I had very little debt at that point in time. I want to say it was around $2,000, but listening to Dave, I wanted to get out of debt. And I started really researching, like not only getting out of debt, but I was really interested in investing. That's when I first learned about Warren Buffett. I was reading books about him and things like that. How did you get involved, or how did you come across Dave Ramsey for the first time?
Actually, I think you introduced me to Dave Ramsey.
Really?
It's not a name that I heard before, but I know that as soon as you introduced me to the name, you talked about Financial Peace University. It wasn't a university that I thought I had the money to actually attend at that point in time, but I also know that there was a lot of bootleg videos from Dave, because YouTube videos were not a big thing back then, but there were a lot of videos about Dave Ramsey that I actually went and looked him up. And I mean, you understand a little bit more about Dave Ramsey when you get to watch his videos. But yes, he was the catalyst to my debt-free journey.
Okay, yeah, because I did not remember that. I was the one that, well, it makes sense that I probably brought it up at some point. But I do remember at that point in time, you were, I guess, once you kind of heard that, we were both excited about getting out of debt and staying out of debt. But even back then, we're talking like 2012-ish, right?
Yes.
We did not do that. And I know I know for myself, one of my first re-entrants back into debt was I bought a car, the same car that I have today. It was 2010 Camry. And I went into debt, obviously, for that. I was like, I justified it. It was a great interest rate. And, that was my first entrance back into debt. I still paid off my credit cards on time and things like that. What about for you? Like, what got you back? I know you were on the right path to get out of debt. And then what happened for you?
Yeah, I remember our conversations very clearly back then because we had both, I think, just paid off whatever it was in terms of our last credit card debt. I mean, I had student loans and other home mortgage. But then my wife, who was a business major in school, but was also very interested in healthcare, wanted to go back to school for a nursing degree. And we're talking about the cost. I mean, I still had my student loans. Is it worth it getting more student loans or just paying directly? But to cut a long story short, we decided to put it all on a credit card that had a zero interest for 12 months. Oh, wait, it was 18 months. And then to try to pay it all off, I think it was about 30 something thousand in 18 months. So that's how I got back into debt, and obviously did not pay it off in 18 months.
Yeah, and I remember at some point at that time too, you guys ended up getting another car.
We did.
And that was added. And the whole time we were like, we probably shouldn't do it, but it was a good deal. Like, I know the first one was 18 months. You're like, well, we'll have it paid off by this time, even though we were like, we shouldn't do it. And then I know the car, the same thing. It was like, and I know for me personally, it was more of as time went by, me and my wife weren't married at that time, but we started putting more and more on the credit cards each month. I would pay it off, but then eventually got to the point where I couldn't pay it off in full, and then it just kind of snowballed from there.
Yep.
Yeah.
I also remember telling you, because you were trying to advise me against making that decision. But then I said, you know what, this is an investment. Having her go to a nursing school, it will pay for itself. And eventually that had become true. But at that point in time was probably totally the very wrong decision in terms of how we financed that education.
Okay, so before we get to like where I guess we kind of fast forward to the current debt-free journey, because I think it was probably last year when I started my own journey, we kind of talked about it, and you had put together a plan to get out of debt and things like that. Mm-hmm. Can you give a little bit of background around how have you learned to manage finances throughout your life, right? As a kid, you didn't grow up in this country. Did your parents teach you about personal finance? Was that a thing? I know when you got to the U.S., talk about like your financial habits throughout your life.
Absolutely. So obviously growing up in Nigeria, there were not really a credit card system. So if you owned a house, you built the house from scratch. It's all your house. If you bought a car, the same way. So the financial instructions from my parents were to work hard and have the money to do whatever you want. But then when I moved into the States, I heard about credit. I learned about credit. And in some cases, learned about credit the hard way. So I was staying with a family member, which at some point decided that it was time for me to move on my own. And that was the first time I actually had to apply for a credit card because I had to move into an apartment and I had to furnish the apartment and I had to live. So that was my first dabble into credit card. I also had a girlfriend then that almost advised me that credit cards were free money that was being provided to help make your life equal. So as growing up in this country from a financial standpoint was really poor training. So I quickly went into debt and I tallied up that debt, including taking unsubsidized loan that was offered freely when I was in college and not understanding that I'd had to pay the money back later. Now, eventually, I went from that being a child and then moved up to a teen where now I had graduated from college and I had good paying jobs. And unfortunately, even though I had good paying jobs, I still saw my credit card balances climbing up more than the monies that I was making. Um, Obviously, this was a habit that the more money that you made, the more money you thought you had to spend to keep up to a lifestyle. And then moving to a young adult, then I, married, having children. I began to think, this is not the way I probably should live, and this is not the way I would like to leave a legacy for my kids. And I knew that it was a high time to make a U-turn. And a mutual friend of ours, Jason, shared an Excel template that he'd used for budgeting.
I remember that, yeah.
And Dave was also very big on budgeting. So the journey then began in terms of putting things together on a template that I was not consistently using. We had tried the Dave Ramsey envelope system. It worked for a while, then it failed. But we learned, and we had our growing pains in terms of our young adult. But right now, I'll classify myself as an adult in financial knowledge, because truly debt free now, except for the mortgage that I have, and feels good to say that.
Okay, so let's talk about that part. So so last year you put together a plan. How much debt did you have? What does your plan look like? And then talk about that.
So last year we had already started working towards truly paying down a lot of the debt. The biggest debt we had back then was a home equity line of credit that was put together in my first mortgage. So I guess then you didn't have enough for a down payment. They had all this type of loans that will give you a home equity that you're pretty much just paying interest only.
Yeah, because you had like a balloon loan or balloon payment coming up at some point. Was that how many years ago was that?
Well, I got into it in 2007, 2008 when I bought my first home.
Okay.
And the balloon payment was actually going to come up in next year. But then I kept looking at it, and you're paying so much. It was an 8.5% home equity. Even when interest rates were falling, we couldn't refinance it because we needed to pay off the balloon. So at some point, we made a decision to move the $18,000 that was left, that was due to balloon in a year, and move it to a zero free interest credit card. But now I had learned my lesson in terms of trying to make sure I paid that off. Mm-hmm. So we had that bulk, and then we also had the student loan was the biggest debt that we had. So probably about $28,000 to $30,000 as of the last time we spoke.
Okay, and then and you just made your last payment. Was that yesterday?
I did make my last payment yesterday. Paid off the final $10,000 in student loan and $1,200 left from the home equity. So pretty much debt free now.
Okay, and I know obviously some of the backstory. So you were able to leverage a bonus for this year, and then go ahead and knock out your final debt, and now you just have your mortgages left. As you said.
That's it, just the mortgages now.
Okay, cool, man. Let's see, what else have we not talked about so far?
The influence of Ramsey.
Yeah. So yeah, how do you? So I guess because I know my opinions or my actions have definitely changed throughout the years about whether or not I don't necessarily agree with everything he says, but I think overall he has a good plan that works for a lot of people. But it's kind of impossible to kind of have a template for everyone, right? So, so how did you do a debt snowball, or how did your views? I guess part of that, because I got the debt snowball from Dave. Did you do that? How have your views changed from first learning about Dave to now? Is it pretty similar? What would you say?
I think the biggest thing I learned from Dave is how fundamental and how important budgeting is, and not just the budget the same Excel spreadsheet that you threw up, but truly a budget that you keep, a budget that you reconcile the next month to make sure that you didn't overspend. Now, I haven't done that religiously, but it helped me get a footing on how much I did spend every month.
So let's talk about that, because I know, so the budgeting, we've gotten into it about the budgeting, because I'm like, you're not doing it right. But I mean, it's personal finance, so you got to do what works best for you. I've been suggesting going down to a zero-based budget where essentially every paycheck you put, where the money. So how do you, so, but I think the way that you structure it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is basically you have your fixed categories, and you have fixed amounts in each of those categories, which rolls over month to month. And then
Right.
you have some fixed money that's left over. And then I believe you just put that, as you use it, you'll put it into the categories. Like, explain what is your budgeting style strategy?
I know we've talked about the zero-based budget, and I believe that's what I do, because zero-based budgeting means starting from scratch every month. Now, even though you're starting from scratch, there are certain expenses that don't change from month to month, right? So, for example, the mortgage will remain the same every month. So every month, I'm just carrying over whatever I put in my template into the next month. Now, my cell phone bill stays the same every month. But then I do have bills that are variable and fluctuate from month to month. So every new month, I'll put in whatever the new light bill is, the new water bill, right? So those would often change. Now, the place that would probably struggle the most, and I think I am not unique to this, is your food categories, like the things that will, no matter how much you put in some cases, you may hit that money exactly, or sometimes you may go over, or sometimes you may stay under. So I don't track that one to the penny, because it's just not worth getting into that with my wife. Obviously, we'll leave some miscellaneous amount in our budget, so that when you do go over, you have the buffer. Dave would not suggest this, and I know YNAB would probably say no, that you should assign every dollar a job.
Mm-hmm.
And for the most part, they are assigned, but you just can't get that finite when it comes to, or that definite when it comes to budgeting.
Yeah, and if you follow my YouTube channel, I'm really big fan of YNAB for budgeting and using that. I haven't convinced him to use that particular tool, but you see, he's starting to learn some of the vernacular on that. So, okay, so debt-free journey. So I think in terms of paying off debt, and the ability to stay on track, and how it relates to your budget, there was a fixed amount that you had set up in your budget to take out for debt each month? And is that kind of the key for you to stay on track to make sure you paid it off?
Absolutely, you have it right. So I do have my regular template in terms of what I use every month for our budgeting, and then I had a different category in terms of my debt, and I also built in how much fixed amount that I was supposed to pay down every single month, and every month I held to that. And the key thing is really following through, even when you have emergencies, which is why an emergency fund is actually key as well.
Right, because I don't think you really had any instances where it was you struggled to pay anything. I mean, pay on your debt, because you do have an emergency fund set up in place, right? And yours is more than a 1 month emergency fund, right?
Well, I have the quick emergency fund, where if something were to break down the house, we have the money to pay for that. But then we also have the 6-month emergency fund, which you try not to keep in the same account, just so it's separate. But yes, we have both.
Okay, cool. So, all right, and I know we can start to wrap down on this today, but what would you suggest what was one of the things you would consider one of your biggest financial mistakes, or if you had to go back and do it all over again, what's something that you think that people can kind of learn from?
That's a very good question. And it's one that thinking back now, I'll probably say it's that home equity loan.
Okay.
Obviously, if I didn't get that loan, I probably wouldn't be able to get our first home. But then when you go back and look at the terms and conditions of that loan, it was just made to rip people off, where you're paying so much in interest, and at the end of the day, you still have the bulk principal to pay. So I don't want to call it a financial mistake, because he gave us a home to live in.
Yeah.
But the amount of money wasted in that was just astronomical.
Because there was like you said earlier, you were just essentially paying interest
Right.
for many years. And
Right.
I know that was right before the whole real estate crash as well. So
That is
timing
true.
was a little off for you. So okay, so good. All right. Well, anything else that I missed that you would like to share on this particular?
Well, I think we both have talked about this, right? It's like Nike's logo, you know, just
Just do it.
do it. We a lot of people understand the situation they're in. A lot of people know what they need to do to get out of debt. A lot of people have all the knowledge. Unfortunately, it's just doing it that's the problem. So if there's one big tip that people will get out of this podcast today is, um, I'm not saying throw everything out of the window, but just do it. You know what to do. Do it.
Yeah, because very good point. Because I know throughout the years, it's like we know we should do this, but we didn't do it. And I'm not, and I know I wouldn't necessarily classify all debt as bad debt, but I know it's particularly in my case, the debt caused a lot of unnecessary stress
Mhm.
and issues in relationships and just a whole bunch of things that it just wasn't worth it for me. And for the most part, I don't even remember what I even paid my debt on. So it's like I have all this credit card. I just paid off my last credit card debt just last week. So pretty excited about that. Now I just have some 401k loans, but like all of it, I've been paying off almost $50,000 in debt, and I really couldn't tell you where most of that money went towards.
Mhm.
So it just isn't worth it in many cases. So definitely just want to encourage you guys, if you're on a debt-free journey or thinking about a debt-free journey, to continue moving forward. And just like David said, just do it. Just get started is the way I like to phrase it. And you'll learn along the way what you need to do to stay successful. So, all right, David, again, appreciate you jumping on. I know,
Absolutely.
really appreciate it. And until next time, man. All right, peace.
Take care, bro.